Welcome back to another episode of Dreading, or if this is your first time here, welcome. Today we're going to be covering the case of Maura Murray, and how a young woman with her whole life ahead of her seemed to vanish into thin air. This case has been requested since the start of our channel, with one of our first viewer suggestions being that we make a comprehensive video covering this story. However, at the time we received the suggestion, I was still working by myself and didn't feel qualified to discuss what happened here. In the time that's elapsed since that first suggestion, I've been able to hire my brother to work with me, and we've kept our eyes on this case, hoping that one day her family would receive answers. But as of recording, that has not occurred. But as always, if there is a case you would like to see us cover or a topic you would like to bring more attention to, let us know by emailing us at dreading.official@gmail.com. We're still consistently going through our emails and adding your suggestions to our list. With that said, it'll likely take us some time before we can cover your suggestion, as we are just two people. But we promise we are trying. So, with all of that said, let us begin. Maura Murray was born on May 4th, 1982, in Hanson, Massachusetts, and was the middle child of an Irish Catholic family. When Maura was just 6 years old, her parents would get a divorce. However, they both stayed active in her life, and she had a great relationship with both of them. She was the fourth child of 5, and strove to stand out amongst her siblings. Her father, Fred, was known for pushing his children towards excellence, and Maura, driven in a way that many others were not, would often exceed expectations. She excelled in school, ran cross-country and track, set multiple school-wide records, and carried herself with a balance of intensity and affability that was far from normal for a teenager. From the outside, she was not only focused and driven but also extremely kind and likable. Her friends and family would recall that she was always smiling and cracking jokes, and was known for, quote, making every room better simply by being in it, unquote. Her teachers and coaches felt similarly, commenting that she was unlike other students in both her discipline and congeniality. After high school, she was accepted into West Point, the famous U.S. military academy, after she'd been recommended to enroll by her older sister, Julie. Julie had found the structure of the military to be helpful in her daily life, and felt that Maura would thrive in the same environment. West Point is the top military academy in the U.S., and famously only accepts around 10% of applicants, but Maura was able to get in without issue. Students are challenged mentally and physically, having to train in hand-to-hand combat and survival skills while taking their courses. They also have to adhere to a strict code of ethics, as they were judged by their moral character alongside their grades and ability to perform. According to letters that Maura had sent to her family during her time in West Point, she didn't thrive in the environment. For most young adults, college is the first time that they're on their own, and is viewed as a time to express themselves and make mistakes. Maura had spent the entirety of her teenage years working hard and exceeding expectations, so it made sense that she would want to spread her wings a bit. But West Point didn't allow that. The cadet code of conduct was so strict that she routinely found herself bumping up against it without meaning to. She was only at the academy for 3 semesters, during which time she was brought before the disciplinary board 7 times. On a training trip to Fort Knox, Maura had been caught shoplifting makeup from the commissary. The theft seemed to be motivated by thrill above all else, as Maura had the money to buy the makeup on her person. After being caught, she confessed to what she'd done, and complied with the school's investigation. When she was brought before the board, they made the final decision that she was not welcome at West Point, and she was allowed to withdraw instead of being expelled. After her withdrawal, she transferred to the University of Massachusetts Amherst to study nursing. Notably, it was a field that still demanded discipline, but without the rigid hierarchy of military life. But Maura's focus wasn't solely on the nursing program. She was also balancing 2 part-time jobs, as well as a long-distance relationship with her boyfriend, Billy, and had been running track in her first few semesters at the school. She was under constant pressure from all sides, and rarely had any time for herself. Reportedly, early on in her time at Amherst, she would succumb to an injury that left her unable to run track. This would have been a massive blow to Maura, as she had defined herself by her physical abilities, and scarcely knew who she was without them. In the months before Maura disappeared, she was involved in a minor incident while working security. Somehow, while checking students into the dorm, she'd been able to steal someone's credit card information. She used their credit card to deliver large amounts of food to her dorm room 6 separate times, with the total cost being $79.02. While it's unclear whether or not Maura bought all the food for herself every time, or if she was sharing food with a friend, Maura is said to have been struggling with an eating disorder. She was not nearly as active as she had been in high school, having less time to dedicate to working out while being under a tremendous amount of stress. High achievers often present themselves as models of discipline, but beneath that exterior, there is a relentless pressure to maintain perfection, and for many people like Maura, that pressure to perform becomes internalized. This is the point where unhealthy coping mechanisms can quietly take root beneath the surface. Disorders like bulimia often have much less to do with food itself and everything to do with control. People who look disciplined, composed, and responsible often struggle most with feelings that they can't afford to fail publicly. So instead, the stress is redirected inward, toward the one area of life that they believe they can dictate with absolute authority: their own body. Binging offers a moment of release, while purging offers a moment of correction, a sort of reset button to right a person's wrongs. In forcing themselves to purge, whether that be through actual regurgitation or extreme workouts, the person feels as if they are demonstrating their own dedication to themselves. They are hurting themselves, sure, but only to get back on track. It's a punishment that they deserve for a wrong action. Both behaviors reinforce the illusion that even when life feels overwhelming, they can still enforce order somewhere. It's the same psychological architecture that makes someone a strong student or a dedicated athlete. In Maura's case, it's not hard to imagine how these pressures could accumulate. She worked exceptionally hard all throughout high school, breaking school records and being the top of every class. There was nothing she couldn't do, and people praised her for it. But the moment she was out on her own, things began to shift. She was getting into trouble, forced to withdraw from West Point, and feeling as if she could do nothing right. And so in times of deep stress and when she needed some relief, she would binge. Then afterwards, feeling ashamed of what she had done, she would purge, hoping through that lone action she could gain some control over her life. So when the credit card holder noticed the charges, they contacted the police, who waited for Maura to try and use the card again. That very night, she placed another large order at the same pizza parlor, and once she had signed the credit card receipt fraudulently, the police confronted her. During Maura's conversation with police, this photo was taken. Many have commented that this photo looks remarkably different than other photos of Maura, given her serious expression. However, given the fact that this was a mugshot being taken by police, it was obviously a stressful situation for the young woman, so her appearance here is not out of the ordinary. After some time, Maura admitted that she used the credit card and had gotten the information off of a receipt she found in the garbage. Though this is no longer the case, if you paid with a credit card, the details of said card would be printed in its entirety on the receipt. Obviously, this has been changed, given how simple it was for a credit card fraud to occur. The charge was continued in December, and was set to be dismissed after 3 months of good behavior. But receiving an actual criminal charge would have been devastating for Maura. This was a person who spent their entire life overachieving and working tirelessly, even at their own detriment, to put forward a perfect facade. And within the first few years of being out of high school, had shattered that in multiple ways. Like her shoplifting from the commissary, multiple sources state that Maura had more than enough money to cover the cost of the food. But like her need to exercise extreme disordered control over her eating, her crimes can also be seen as a way she tried to relieve the mounting tension in her life. Shoplifting in particular has a documented pattern among individuals who feel trapped by expectations. It isn't usually about needing the item, it's about the temporary drop in anxiety that occurs during the act. For a few moments, the brain shifts from internal pressure to a kind of tunnel vision. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as self-soothing through risk, a behavior that gives a brief sense of relief or clarity in the middle of emotional overload. So when she's stealing, she isn't thinking about her relationship with her boyfriend, or how her sister is struggling, or how her parents might be disappointed in her. She's just thinking about getting away with it. Credit card fraud, especially at the low level Maura was cited for, fits the same pattern. It's a quick, impulsive decision made in the moment. But it's also an issue of control. When life feels unpredictable, people often gravitate towards behaviors that give them a momentary sense of power. For some, it becomes substance use. For others, restrictive eating. And for a subset of high-stress individuals, small acts of rule-breaking create a strange sense of balance. In that context, her shoplifting and credit card theft were indicators of someone who felt overwhelmed, isolated, and caught between who they are expected to be and what they're actually capable of handling in that moment. But Maura wasn't the only member of her family that was struggling during this time. This information was only made public in 2017, but while Maura was struggling in college, her sister Kathleen was struggling with alcohol dependency. Details about what Kathleen was going through at the time are sparse. But in February 2004, she had been admitted to a rehab facility. There, she was able to get clean and sober. However, once she was released, her fiancé immediately drove her to a liquor store, which resulted in her relapse. On February 5th, while Maura was working at the security desk in her dorm, she would make and receive a few calls. The first call she would receive came at around 10:10 p.m. and lasted nearly 20 minutes. Kathleen had called her and told her about her relapse. Though this call was said to be emotionally taxing for Maura, outwardly, her coworkers said she seemed fine. Phone records would show that she received another call at 12:07 a.m. from her boyfriend Billy. Following that call, phone records would show that she received another call, this one being from the work phone, from an unknown number at 12:40 a.m., which left her visibly distraught. The call was later traced to another campus telephone line, but at the time of writing, we don't know who was on the other end of that call. Maura's coworkers would state that she broke down in tears after this specific call. Her supervisor would go to check on her, only to find her despondent. She seemed unaware of her surroundings, to the point where she was mostly unresponsive to their questions and concerns. According to their testimony, when she was asked what she was doing, she simply said, "My sister," then refused to speak. At that point, they escorted her back to her dorm. Her supervisor asked Maura if she would like her to stay and talk, or simply just to be there for her, but Maura said no, and went further to state that her roommate would be home, so she would be well looked after. But this was a lie, as she lived alone. There's no evidence that Maura did anything that night besides go to bed. However, her odd reaction to the third phone call has caused many people to speculate as to what her reaction was caused by. As stated, her sister had called her earlier that night, and though she wasn't happy during the call, she was able to continue working without issue for the next few hours. When asked what was wrong, she brought up her sister, but was unclear about which one. Though it may seem obvious to say Kathleen, as that was the sister she had most recently spoken with, she was much closer to her sister Julie, and might have been attempting to ask her coworkers to contact her. Her having a delayed reaction to her sister's relapse is also not uncommon, as it might have taken a bit of time for the gravity of the situation to sink in. It's also very possible that Maura tried her best to move past the news while she was at work, not wanting to make a spectacle of herself, but was unable to hold it together for a long period of time. According to friends and family, the relationship had become contentious due to the distance. Both had allegedly cheated on the other, but decided to stay together. However, Billy's cheating deeply hurt Maura. This statement has been contested by Billy, as well as Maura's father, Fred. Billy alleged that the pair were, quote, engaged to be engaged, and that the relationship was fine. Meanwhile, Fred would state that the pair would have, quote, ended up married, unquote, and that Maura was excitedly arranging her life to be closer to him. And then there is this mysterious third call. This call was made to the work phone, and in the 2 decades that have elapsed while this case has been open, no one has come forward to say that they were on the other end of the call. It's possible that the call was simply a concerned student making a report about someone's drunken antics, which triggered Maura due to her sister's struggles. But the fact that no one has ever come forward is odd. On Saturday, February 7th, Maura's father, Fred, would drive to Amherst to take Maura car shopping. She'd been driving a 1996 black Saturn, which had been less than reliable. According to friends, the car was constantly breaking down on her, leaving her stranded and making it hard to get her to her clinical nursing courses that were out of the area. She'd been forced to carpool for her fall semester, and Fred had planned to get her a newer vehicle, taking out around $4,000 from various ATMs. Notably, Maura had not informed any of her friends of her father's upcoming visit, or her plans to get a new car. The pair would spend the afternoon car shopping, but ultimately left the lots empty-handed, as he didn't have enough funds to cover the purchase. They then picked up one of Maura's friends and went out to dinner. After dinner, Fred would drive the girls to a liquor store, where they would purchase a considerable amount of liquor. Fred's story about this trip has changed somewhat, as he originally stated that he stayed in the car while the girls shopped. Later on, he would claim that he told the girls to hurry up as they were shopping, implying that he had gone inside with them. After acquiring the alcohol, Maura, in Fred's brand new Corolla, would drop her father off at his hotel before going to a campus party. Fred would allow Maura, who just bought a significant amount of alcohol, to take his car, despite knowing that she was going to be drinking. This decision would obviously end terribly. The party was held by one of Maura's coworkers at her second job. According to police records, no one at this party besides the host knew Maura or her friend. Moreover, there is no record of who was at this party besides Sarah and Maura's friend, as they both went on to state that they don't remember who was there or what happened at the party, and if Maura spoke to anyone there or if she left with anyone. And the fact that neither of these women could remember any details about the party independent of each other is deeply suspicious, especially since Sarah was the one throwing the party. How she held an event but had no idea who was possibly invited or who actually attended has led people to suspect that she either purposely is lying to the police or has something to hide, or maybe that someone at the party had drugged those in attendance. Surely there would be some record of who she invited either on her phone or email. But in the years that have elapsed since this case was publicized, this fact has not changed. Regardless of the reasoning, to this day, we still don't know what happened during this party, only that Maura left at 2:30 a.m. to drive her father's car back to the motel he was staying in. We know for a fact that Maura had been drinking, and in her stupor, she would fail to turn at a T intersection and instead crashed into the guardrail, totaling her father's brand new car. The police responded to the incident, but no charges were filed. Their statement notes that Maura was visibly shaken, but despite having spent the past few hours drinking and having been in a fixed object collision, which most commonly occurs to impaired individuals, she was not given a breathalyzer or any field sobriety tests. Again, this detail is incredibly odd. Maura had been drinking, obviously so, and yet the officers who came to the scene did not notice or care. The responding officers then drove Maura to the motel her father was staying in, and somehow she gained entry into his room, despite not having a key card. Fred notably was not woken up when she entered the bedroom, or when she used his phone to call her boyfriend. At 4:49 a.m., a call was made on Fred's cell phone to Billy by Maura. According to Billy, he consoled her about the accident, as she seemed deeply shaken up, but he felt that, quote, there was more than just the accident on her mind, unquote. When her father eventually woke up to find Maura in his hotel room, he would state that she was deeply distraught about the accident. She was apologetic, so much so that Fred stated he wasn't really upset about what had happened. He would go further to state that, quote, she was upset, but it was okay. If this is the only trouble a kid ever causes, then you're pretty lucky as a parent. But as we know, that wasn't the only trouble she got into. However, his statement would imply that he was either unaware of why she really left West Point and the subsequent credit card theft, but this statement was made after she had gone missing. Fred would state that he was more concerned about how he would be getting home, as he had an obligation to work the following day. But after a few calls, he found that his insurance would cover the accident, and then got himself a rental car and dropped Maura off at her dorm. He would call her later that night around 11:30 to remind her to pick up the accident forms from the DMV for his insurance. According to him, she was still apologetic about the accident, but was otherwise fine. However, within the next 24 hours, Maura would vanish without a trace. Shortly after speaking to her dad, she would use MapQuest to search for directions from Amherst, Massachusetts to Burlington, Vermont, which would be around a 3-hour drive. The directions themselves didn't mark a location in Burlington she was trying to reach, and no one in Maura's life knew any reason why she would want to go there. Around 3 a.m., Maura would email a homework assignment to one of her classmates. The assignment was for each student to Google a set of terms and email them to each other. Following sending the homework, it would appear that Maura went to sleep for the night. The following morning, there was a massive snowstorm and all classes were canceled. According to phone records, Billy called Maura several times that morning and afternoon, and left a couple of different voicemails. Just before 1 p.m. on February 9, 2004, Maura would place a call to Dominic and Linda Salamone, owners of a privately rented condominium at the Seasons at Attitash Resort in Bartlett, New Hampshire. The Murray family had stayed at the Seasons before, though never at the Salamone unit specifically. The property wasn't the kind of place one could reserve spontaneously, as the Salamones were choosy about who they rented their condo out to. The call itself lasted 3 minutes. The couple would later admit that they remembered very little from that conversation, especially since nearly a year had passed before police contacted them for details. They were confident about one thing, though, that being that Maura did not book their condominium. Linda would later speculate that she may have offered Maura other lodging suggestions, given the area's tourism layout, but she was unable to recall what she actually said. What is known is that for some reason, Maura was preparing to spend some time away from school on her own without telling anyone in her life. Around the same time period, Maura emailed her boyfriend in response to his multiple calls. The email read, quote, "I love you more, stud. I got your messages, but honestly, I didn't feel like talking to much of anyone. I promised to call today though. Love you, Maura." Unquote. Maura's friends and family have said that this was deeply out of character for her, as she was always quick to respond to their messages, no matter what she was doing. It was exceedingly rare that she ever needed space, or was unable to talk. At 1:13 p.m., shortly after that call, Maura reached out to a fellow nursing student, though there was no confirmed record as to why. Some investigators have noted that she may have been arranging to return borrowed scrubs. Family members maintained that this would fit her personality, as they believe that even in moments of personal stress, she tended to tie up loose ends. Returning the scrubs could have simply been a courteous thing to do, given that she was planning to leave the area for an unknown amount of time. However, it could also indicate that she was not planning on returning at all. At 1:24 p.m., Laura would then email her professors as well as her boss at the art gallery that she would be, quote, heading home for a week due to a death in the family, unquote. But no such death had occurred. Many people have speculated as to why she would tell such an outrageous lie. However, the purpose seemed obvious. By claiming there was a death in the family, she was making it harder for her bosses or professors to penalize her absence. It takes a fair bit of time to save up a week's worth of vacation days, and obviously you don't get excused absences from your classes without due cause. If she simply wanted a break, she needed to think of a valid reason that she could be excused without anyone asking too many questions or being punished. Similarly, if she was attempting to run away or trying to purposely disappear, she was giving herself a week's head start, so to speak. At 2:05 p.m., Maura would call a centralized system for booking hotels in Stowe, Vermont. The timing was odd, and the call was ultimately unproductive as the system was actually down at the time, so no reservations could be made. But the call shows that Maura wasn't simply browsing ideas. She was actively seeking a place to go, even if her destination remained fluid. First Bartlett, then Stowe. Both areas far from campus, both connected to quiet rural landscapes, and both happened to be reachable within a few hours' drive. At 2:18 p.m., she followed up by calling Billy directly and leaving a voicemail. According to Billy's mother, Maura's message was short and emotional, something along the lines of, "I love you, I miss you, I want to talk." Notably, Billy did not pick up the call because he was attempting to call Maura's friend, Kate, who had been at the party with her. Billy called Kate's phone, as well as her dorm phone, within the span of 3 minutes. He had called Maura multiple times that day, and having been unable to contact her, began reaching out to her friends. This was not uncommon for Billy, according to those close to the couple, as they stated he could be controlling over her. While Maura had been making calls and sending emails, she had also seemingly been packing. We say seemingly as many people theorize she had never properly unpacked her belongings after she returned for the spring semester, which had only just begun. Regardless, when campus police would find her room, all of her items were still packed away in boxes. All of the art she had previously had on the walls was taken down, and she had printed out an email between her and Billy which she left on top of the boxes. According to police records, the boxes were purposely placed, as if to draw specific attention to the email on top. The contents of the email revolved around Billy having cheated on her months before, and how devastated she was over the infidelity. From how the room was set up, it was clear that she wanted to draw attention to the heartbreak for whatever reason. Only she was aware of her plan, but it's unlikely that she arranged the boxes in that manner and left the email on top by accident, given how the police have discussed it, meaning that if she had purposely gone missing, the email was to serve as an explanation. At 3:30 p.m., Maura would pack some clothing, toiletries, her birth control, some of her textbooks, her cell phone and charger, her favorite stuffed animal from childhood, and a diamond necklace that Billy had given her into her Saturn, and then would leave the campus. 10 minutes later, she would be captured on an ATM security camera, withdrawing $280 from her bank account, leaving $16 there. She was clearly trying to empty her account in full. However, the machine only had 20s in it at the time, so she left the remainder there. On the surveillance footage, she did not appear agitated, nervous, or upset. She shows no signs of distress at all, and had it not been for her later disappearance, her emptying her account in this way wouldn't raise any eyebrows. Following her visit to the ATM, Maura would stop at a local liquor store, where she turned in 79 cans and bottles, redeeming $3.95, before purchasing a box of Franzia wine, a bottle of Kahlua, a bottle of vodka, a nip of Bailey's, and a 12-pack of Smirnoff Ice, which is a frankly strange and disgusting mix. Police speculate that after picking up the alcohol, Maura then picked up duplicate copies of the accident report forms from the police station to send to her father. She then began to drive north towards the wilderness of New Hampshire. At 4:37, she called her dorm's voicemail for 4 minutes, but it's unclear what messages she listened to. At 5 p.m., her cell phone pinged off of a tower within 20 miles of Londonderry, New Hampshire, a considerable ways away from Amherst. This ping was likely caused by a call she did not answer. 2 hours later, Maura's black Saturn would become lodged in a snowbank in Woodsville, New Hampshire. How this occurred is still unknown, but the area was covered in fresh snowfall, and the roads were said to be extremely difficult to drive in due to the adverse weather. A nearby neighbor would report hearing a loud thump around 7 p.m., only to see the car facing west on the eastbound side of the road. The witness called 911 to report the accident, and claimed to see a man in the passenger seat of the vehicle smoking a cigarette. She didn't approach the vehicle or check on the occupants, but she was certain that the person in the car was a man and he was smoking. Her husband, however, felt different. He would state that he believed that the person inside the car was a woman, and that she was not smoking but was on her phone. He went further to state that the little red light on her flip phone looked like a cigarette, and that his wife was merely confused. But both parties are certain in what they believe that they saw. After reporting the crash to the police, an officer was immediately dispatched to the area. Another neighbor was said to have seen the accident. They claimed they saw the car a ways down the road with their emergency lights on, with someone walking around the vehicle. While both sets of neighbors observed the aftermath of the crash, Arthur Atwood, but also known as Butch, would pass by the scene. Seeing a young woman alone by the crash site, he would stop and offer some help. Atwood would state that she didn't appear injured, just cold and shaken up from the crash. He asked the young woman if she wanted him to call the police, but she told him not to bother as she already called AAA. This was a lie. Maura did not have any cell phone service due to how remote the area was. However, the tone of this conversation has been disputed. Atwood would state that Maura was shaken up from the crash but otherwise okay. She seemed fully in her right mind, and he didn't notice any serious injury or notice any signs of intoxication. But in the police's theorized version of events, they would state that Maura desperately pleaded with Atwood not to contact the authorities, as she was intimidated by the heavy-set man. Atwood then offered to let Maura wait at his home until help arrived, but she wanted to stay with the car. He then advised her to turn her lights on, to avoid getting hit by vehicles coming around the bend. He then left the scene and drove 100 yards to his home. There, he too contacted the police, though he had a difficult time getting through due to the busy phone circuits. As he spoke to the police, he noticed a few cars had driven by, but has since stated he didn't see or hear anything strange during that time. After Atwood drove away, Faith Westman, the initial witness, noticed the Saturn's interior lights switch on and off. It would seem that Maura attempted to heed Atwood's advice, but either thought better of it or was stopped. Faith would also state that she saw someone standing at the rear of the car, although she couldn't identify them. Another witness would come forward and state that she drove by the scene at around 7:37, only a few moments after Atwood would leave the scene. She claimed that she saw a police SUV parked in front of Murray's car. She claimed to have pulled over for a brief moment, pondering if it would be necessary to help, but as she didn't see anyone inside or outside of the vehicle, she ultimately decided to leave. This witness's testimony doesn't align with any of the other witnesses, nor does it align with the official police log. But this lone witness statement has been used in multiple theories as to what could have happened to Maura, so we felt it necessary to include. Between 7 to 9 minutes after Bush left the scene, Haverhill Police Sergeant Cecil Smith would arrive at the crash site. It had been nearly 20 minutes since the crash had been reported initially, but the car itself was locked, and Maura was nowhere to be seen. Sergeant Smith found a box of Franzia wine behind the driver's seat of the vehicle, and a red liquid on the driver's side door and the ceiling of the car. The box was damaged, likely in the accident, but there was evidence that Maura might have been drinking while driving. The car also contained Maura's AAA card, almost everything she had packed at the school, and directions she had printed out for Burlington and Stowe. It seemed that even as she was driving, she still had not decided where she wanted to go. Notably alongside her textbooks, the police found the book Not Without Peril by Nicholas Howe in the car. The book is filled with stories about people who attempt to climb mountains before they are prepared, oftentimes succumbing to the elements. The only things missing were her debit card, credit cards, some of the alcohol she had purchased, and her cell phone. The officer processed the scene the best he could, talking to all available witnesses, but no one seemed to know where Maura disappeared to. EMS and a fire truck were also dispatched to the area, but with no one to treat, they quickly dispersed. New Hampshire State Trooper John Monahan also stopped by the scene of the accident. It's not clear what time he arrived or if he'd been dispatched to the accident or if he stopped on his own accord. Cecil, obviously worried that there could be an injured woman wandering through the snow, spent the next few hours searching for Maura. Atwood aided in the search, but neither party found any sign of her. The scene, though strange, had no obvious signs of foul play, and by all appearances, it looked as if Maura had left of her own free will. The pair would end their search around 9:30 p.m., as he had to respond to another call. At this point, the officer theorized that, due to the alcohol found in the car, Maura had been drunk driving, got into an accident, and then fled the scene so that she wouldn't get into any further trouble. With no signs of foul play, and no one to be able to say if Maura had willingly left the scene or not, the police did not begin to search for the young woman. Instead, they towed her vehicle to a local lot, and would then wait to call her father, the title owner, until the next day around 3:20 p.m. They would leave a message telling him that his car was abandoned, but would say nothing of Maura. Fred had been working at the time, but would eventually be made aware of what had happened when Kathleen would call him at 5 p.m. that day. The car having been found without Maura immediately troubled him, and he would call the Haverhill police and insist that they begin searching for his daughter. Feeling as though Maura was not truly missing, the police responded that they could start a search the following day if Maura had not been found at that point. Again, they believed that the young girl had been drinking and simply didn't want to face a drunk driving charge. In our previous coverage of missing persons cases, we have discussed how vital the first 24 hours of the case is. The faster the police jump into action looking for a missing individual, the more likely it is that they'll be found safe. But in this case, no one was really looking for Maura until much later. Any crime scene evidence would have likely succumbed to the elements, meaning that there wouldn't be a way of piecing together where Maura had even run off to, or if she had gone off by herself or had been taken in the few moments she was left alone. Maura went missing on February 9th, while the area was covered in snow. Visibility was not ideal, and she would have no idea where she was. If she left the scene willingly, it's entirely possible that she could have slipped into a ditch on the side of the road that was covered in snow or injured herself and been unable to get help. If she had been abducted, either by her car or further down the road, there might have been evidence of that in the snow. However, by the time the search was well underway, it would have either been covered by more snow or melted away. However, Atwood might not have been the last person to see Maura. Between 8 and 9:30 p.m., a contractor who lived around 5 miles away from the crash site would see someone matching Maura's description moving quickly on foot going east, on Route 112. This sighting was not reported to the police immediately, due to the witness's confusion about the fates. He would eventually go to the police 3 months after Maura's disappearance, but by then the trail was already cold. The next day, Fred Murray would arrive in Haverhill, determined to find his daughter. Almost immediately, he got the sense that the local police were botching the investigation. He asked them what they had done since finding the car, and almost all of the answers seemed ridiculous to him. Fred has repeatedly called for the police involved with his daughter's case to be investigated by the FBI, believing they mishandled the investigation and should be penalized for that. But as we stated, the officers had no reason to believe that something had happened to Maura based on the evidence, and there were only 4 officers on duty in the area, including the chief, available to aid in the investigation when it occurred. This is a very small town, and based entirely on what has been made available, the police's actions made sense. At 8 a.m., Fred, alongside the New Hampshire Fish and Game, began their official search. The police used a scent tracking dog, giving them a pair of gloves that were found in the car. The dog would follow the scent 100 yards east of the crash, where it seemed to disappear. This suggested to police that Maura had walked away from her vehicle after the crash, only to get in another car 100 feet away. However, Fred would claim that Maura had never used gloves before, so her scent would not be as strong, and that the dogs had picked up a false scent. He claims that he begged the officers to use her running shoes, which she had used for years, but for some reason they refused. At the same time, Billy had gotten on a flight to come and aid in the search. He had turned his cell phone off, but later found a mysterious call had come in while he was in the air. The call reportedly sounded like a woman shivering and whimpering, as if she was very cold. Billy and his family would state that this woman was clearly Maura. Billy called his mom, frantic about the voicemail. He was sure it was Maura, and it sounded as if she was hurt. The number the call came from was traced to an AT&T calling card, which was notable, as Maura had gotten 2 calling cards from Billy's family that Thanksgiving. After an investigation, New Hampshire State Police traced the calling card to the American Red Cross. However, this lone phone call has been hotly debated. Sharon, Billy's mother, contended that the call could not have come from the Red Cross at all, and was untraceable. She also stated with certainty that it was Maura on the other end of the line. However, when the call was examined by the police, they claimed that the message was simply static. That same evening, Billy was interviewed and ruled out as a potential suspect, but with all the available information the police had been able to gather in the short investigation, they felt that Maura had driven to the area with either plans to run away or plans to kill herself. Fred was certain that this wasn't the case, as Maura had not been troubled when he last saw her, and would go on to use this information as evidence that the police were not equipped to handle this case properly. However, the signs surrounding Maura's final days tell a more complicated story. It doesn't necessarily confirm suicidal intent, but does raise valid concerns about her mental and emotional stability at the time. There are certain behavioral patterns that psychologists frequently observe in people who are contemplating ending their own lives. One of the most common is the quiet process of closing out their responsibilities. This can include returning borrowed items, organizing personal belongings, or cleaning spaces that would otherwise cause their family distress later. It's an attempt in their distorted and overwhelmed mindset to make things easier for people they care about. Maura's behavior on the day she left campus has parallels to this pattern. Her dorm room, packed into boxes, looked like someone who anticipated being absent for an extended period. The call to a fellow nursing student to return borrowed scrubs fits the same template. These actions taken alone prove nothing, but within the broader context, they are consistent with an individual tying up loose ends in a quiet, methodical way. Another important element is Maura's documented history of struggling with an eating disorder, specifically disordered behaviors involving self-harm through food restriction or purging. Eating disorders are often less about body image and more about coping with emotional distress, control, and internal turmoil. They tend to co-occur with depression, anxiety, and overwhelming feelings of inadequacy, which can also lead to suicidal ideation. Add to the fact that she had just totaled her father's new car, something that both Billy and Fred confirmed left her shaken. She felt horrible about it, more than they stated was necessary. Though she hadn't been penalized by police for the accident, She might have thought that it would have hurt her credit card fraud case from being dismissed, or that her father was deeply disappointed in her. Whatever the case, the accident affected her negatively, and that unfortunately might have been the final straw. Fred's certainty that she wouldn't have done that comes from a place of love and disbelief. He loves Maura, and the idea that she would want to harm herself would feel insulting to her memory. However, that doesn't mean that it's not a real possibility, and the police noting that they felt that Maura may be a danger to herself did not mean that they were ruling out other possibilities. A week after Maura went missing, Fred and Billy would be interviewed by CNN, and the search would be expanded into Vermont. Notably, the search was expanded by the family, not the police, and they stated that they were shocked to see that authorities in the surrounding areas had not been made aware of the missing persons case. 3 days later, the FBI would become involved in the search. This led to more aggressive efforts to find Maura, as they were able to utilize a helicopter with thermal imaging, tracking dogs, and cadaver dogs. But still, there were no signs of Maura anywhere. Her cell phone, credit, and debit cards had not been used since before the crash, and due to either her cell phone dying or poor coverage, her phone couldn't be tracked. Without any new leads, the official search efforts were reduced as time went on. However, Fred would not be deterred. He would return to the area every week, trying to find some evidence of his missing daughter. Fred and Julie would talk to anyone they could about the case, wanting to keep it in the public consciousness in the hopes that someone who knew something might come forward. That same year, a man would come forward and state that he believed that his brother had killed Maura. He gave Fred a rusty, stained knife, and told the father that his brother had been acting strangely since her disappearance. However, family members of the man would state that he had a history of drug use, and made up the claim in order to obtain the reward money. In 2005, Fred would petition the New Hampshire governor and the FBI to help with the case. He also appeared on the Montel Williams show to bring more attention to the search efforts. He would also file suit against several law enforcement agencies in order to gain access to the evidence in the case. Over the years, multiple independent agencies and private investigators have worked on the case, wanting to find out what happened to Maura. In 2006, a volunteer-led search took place within a few miles of the crash site, hoping to find any possible evidence. During this search, cadaver dogs reacted positively to the presence of human remains at an A-frame house in the area. This home belonged to the brother of the man who had given Fred the rusty knife 2 years prior. The property would not be searched until 2019, as the owners refused to allow Fred or police onto the property, and they weren't able to get a probable cause warrant. However, in 2019, they would sell the home, and the new owners would allow multiple searches, but no evidence was found. Maura's case and the lack of any direct evidence showing what happened to her has led to an entire community of interested parties popping up. Her disappearance has long been called the first crime mystery of the social media age, given how many websites, forums, and online discussions there are about her to this day. Because we cannot say for sure what happened either way, people who have come into contact with this case will come up with their own theories of what they believe happened and who is involved. In our time researching this case and trying to plainly compile the facts, we unfortunately stumbled upon multiple instances of people spreading blatant misinformation due to their own theory crafting. Though a vast majority of these individuals are trying to help, this has led to multiple people being unfairly implicated in a disappearance and potential homicide, and real-life harassment being sent to those related to the case. The depressing truth of this case is that, at the time of recording, there's no evidence as to what happened to Maura, and unfortunately, nothing is certain. There are various theories, from Maura having hurt herself or from her being on the run from the law due to a hit-and-run that happened in the same time frame. However, because we know nothing for certain, using our platform to push any theories feels unethical and strange, and goes against the wishes of her family. Since her disappearance, there have been multiple alleged sightings, but nothing concrete. On screen now is an aged progress photo, as found on the FBI's Missing Persons website. If you believe you've seen Maura or have any information about what happened to her, please come forward. Her family deserves closure, even if she's no longer alive. So, if you've made it to this portion of the video, thank you for watching. This case was difficult to parse through, given how much speculation and theorizing has been entangled in the facts, but hopefully we were able to do it justice. If you found our coverage lacking in any way, you can let me know by either leaving a comment or emailing me at dreading.official@gmail.com. If there's a case you would like to see us cover or a story you want to bring more attention to, you can let me know via those avenues as well. Have a great day and remember, stay safe.